Kendrick to our event today and tomorrow. Michael will be known to many of you. He asked him how often he travels to New Zealand, and he said he thought he'd been here maybe 100 times. So maybe he's older than he looks, or he's never home, and I suspect it's the matter. I had the privilege of hearing Michael speak in Vancouver a year or so ago, and I can promise you he's erudite, he's articulate, at times he's amusing, and he's always challenging. For me it was the highlight of the two-day conference there, listening to Michael. Because we've got a very short amount of time, I just want to take, I'm not going to speak any longer. I think it's important that Michael has the full half hour that's available, which is, I assure you, a very short time for someone who's such a great speaker. But I want to take two executive decisions here, Marcia. Firstly, not to read the CV. It's in your file. You can have it in a little booklet. You can read it for yourself or ask someone to read it for you. And secondly, I want to give Michael his full half hour, which means that we'll probably eat up some of afternoon tea time, and we will either push the whole session back. You don't need me to talk to Michael. The floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is kind of when everybody has a nap, so it's good that you got me as the speaker. You can get on with the important thing. Okay, well, this is a quote I like. To really change the world, we have to help people change the way they see things. Global betterment is a mental process, not one that requires huge sums of money or a high level of authority. Change has to be psychological. So if you want to see real change, stay persistent in educating humanity on how similar we all are than different. And again, we tend to underestimate the importance of mindsets and assumptions and beliefs, but yet they are the things that make the world go around, particularly when they're the right assumptions or beliefs. So I'll just start with that kind of premise. There's a quote from Gandhi: first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. And I don't think he was thinking of Trump. But they certainly did ignore him and laugh at him, and then fought him, and then he won. God knows what that means. Although the world is full of suffering, it is full also of the overcoming of it. A great quote from Helen Keller. Now, it's not a safe bet to assume that people with disabilities will be routinely treated equally to other people. We've just not seen that. And much of this derives from unconscious beliefs that are predicated on the core assumption that people with disabilities are somehow fundamentally not like other people. And as long as we start from that assumption, we're toast. Because when you're not like other people, what are you? You're sort of like not people. And not people isn't really the theme for a good life. And when people can get away with not treating people as others expect to be treated, then we have, of course, second-class citizens, we have second-class lives, and we have a lot of unhappy people. And very few of us would consciously admit that we have a different and usually diminished expectations of people with disabilities. But when you look at the empirical evidence, we behave as if that's true. In other words, our slogans don't say it, but our behavior speaks quite loudly. So in this sense, we aren't really in touch with our true assumptions. We're probably being a bit delusional because we've read too many mission statements. Now, the recognition that this is the case has been actually a good thing because it's encouraged people to do something about it. And consequently, we've had several generations of progress in the lives of people with disabilities. In fact, I can't find another time in history where we've had such a long run of progress and advancements. But still, we're not out of the woods, even with all that, and there still is a huge amount of ambiguity in our culture about just what we actually are committed to and what we're actually can be counted on to do. In other words, don't take us at our word because it isn't worth much. We still have a great habit of breaking our promises. I love this quote from Lao Tzu. if you do not change direction, you may end up where you're heading. I don't know what it means, but Chinese people said it. It must be good. So this hesitancy to accord people with disabilities equal status and life expectations actually reveals that at the level of conviction, we're not convinced about our rhetoric. We really are not convinced because we're not acting on it decisively. And so that hesitancy generally only creates kind of politically correct behavior. It doesn't create often enough decisive action based on more positive premises. And so even though we don't think about it, we are often in a situation where we are really acting like there's no evidence that people with disabilities could enjoy good lives like the rest of the community. We act like that's not real, that the evidence doesn't exist, and that there's somehow some kind of question about that. And of course what that means is that the link between what it means to be a human being and disability is such that, well, there's sort of real human beings, and then there's disabled people, which are kind of a proto-human being. And that ambiguity shouldn't be an ambiguity. That should be utterly rejected as inconsistent with the evidence, quite apart from inconsistent with the morality. And so we see in the consciousness of our societies, our communities, a great deal of tentativeness, uncertainty, doubt, undeclared skepticism, superficial inclusion into community life, all of which are signs that people are acting like they're not convinced, that there is a yes but somewhere that we should act on. And of course this just delays the day when people with disabilities should get the opportunities they deserve. On everything measurable, people with disabilities do less well than their fellow citizens. And that won't ever change until we become decisive in rebutting whatever skepticism that's out there. We really have to take it on. Now, this quote from Isaac Asimov: "Your assumptions are your windows on the world. Scrub them off every once in a while or the light won't come in." And I'm presuming we're still walking around with some pretty dark assumptions that are letting the light not get in. And why I would say that is you can just see the outcomes. If our assumptions are so terrific, how come our outcomes are so unterrific? So in this sense, we really do have some problems at the level of fundamental belief. Now, when people hear the term good life, they often discount it because it sounds like when people say the good life that people with disabilities, we're being too utopian and too unrealistic. Whether we're parents, whether we're professionals, whether we're just ordinary people on the street, there is a sense that, oh, well, you've got to tone down your expectations for people with disabilities, and the good life is a bridge too far. It's somehow you're smoking something that's still illegal in some parts of the world. So they would believe that the good life is an idyllic fantasy, but not feasible in practice. And this is where the battle line really is. Is the good life actually within hand? Could it be obtained? So the theory behind this is that if you have functional impairments of some kind, you got to ratchet down the idea of the good life, because you're not going to get it. You're going to get some watered down version of it. But when people actually get their lives ordered so that they can manage, they can enjoy pretty much anything anybody else can enjoy. So functional impairments aren't really a big deal. How many of you, for instance, can't do some things? And how many of you, despite a lot of things, have had a pretty good life? Yeah, I mean, I'm in a room full of people incompetent, unable to manage X, Y, and Z, and they all say it doesn't matter. We still had a lot of good things happen in your life. So there's the empiricism of it. It's got nothing to do with what you can't do, and that's a basic fact. You can enjoy life even if you can't do things. And so in that sense, everybody's impaired, and some are, of course, have huge capacities that are untapped. My view would be that we can manage whatever functional issues people have. It's not a big deal. The big deal is we are helping people with their functional impairments and they still don't have a life. And I think that's a big deal. The issue isn't do people need assistance. The issue is do they get a good life? And they're quite different preoccupations. So in this sense, we've got all kinds of people in services that don't have a life, but they've got services. So when people get up in the morning, they say, oh, I really like a good service. You know? How is that for you? As we express our gratitude, we must never forget that the highest appreciation is not to utter words, but to live by them. And of course, he got shot, so you got to be careful. You got to be careful what you say. You know? People take offense, probably the CIA, you know, and some of the other people that will soon be unleashed upon us. God knows what they are. Anyways, we have the words that we don't live up to. We have a long list of words we don't live up to because the words aren't the issue. The issue is, are we living the words? Is there any correlation between the talk and the walk? And we've got to be much more into the walk than the talk. It's a kind of simple kind of challenge. Now, if you interpret the good life as somehow a state of existence of ongoing bliss, ease, and life enjoyment, then that constitutes quite a different problem, because then we're assuming that life can be without difficulties. And of course, this is a different problem with the use of the term the good life, because many people think the good life is the life where everything works out. And of course, then people quite realistically say, well, that can't be true, because you know, life isn't that easy. It's difficult. It's challenging. So anybody that says people should have a good life isn't really paying attention to what goes into life. And of course, when you look at the things that can make life difficult, like mortality, finiteness, suffering, disease, labor, finances, self-evaluation, consciousness, harm and loss, misfortune, moral responsibility. It's a wonder we get up in the mornings. How was your day? It was pretty horrible, actually. All of those happened. And it's only noon. So, and philosophers refer to this really as the human condition. And so people might assume that if you have the human condition, in other words, you're going to have hard lives, you can't have a good life. But how many of you think you kind of fit into the human condition? You have all the features of human life, and yet you've had a good life. Yeah. So the good life isn't an easy life. You know, otherwise nobody'd ever have children. Then where would we be? Because children are a recipe for hidden expenses. Often well into adulthood, often into old age. So that's just one thing. And how many of you still kind of like your kids? Yeah. So even though it was, nothing was easy about raising children, in the business of raising children are all sorts of joys and satisfactions and so on. So again, the human condition does not cancel out then the expectation for the good life. You can have all kinds of hard things happen in life and still have a good life. We just have to be very careful that a lot of people doubt that that's true. They really do not believe that people with disabilities could have a good life, and they have a long list of yes buts, and so we're facing unrelenting kind of skepticism from them. The issue isn't really to antagonize people in that regard, because many of the people that really have doubts. They're not really going to be bullied into thinking the proper thought. They really have to have those doubts resolved, and that's the kind of conversation we need. We need to get people to decision, and we will not get them to decision if they will not admit to their doubts, their skepticism, their being unpersuaded. And we simply have not been that persuasive. A lot of people still have many unresolved doubts. The healing social life is found when in the mirror of each human soul, the whole community finds its reflection, and when in the community, the virtue of each one is living. So in this sense, kind of a more spiritual take on it, that the universe does not make mistakes. And each life ought to be seen as a kind of a precious accomplishment. No matter what form it takes, no matter what seeming shortcomings people have, the very fact that people have an existence is a very profound starting point and ought to merit some kind of honor in terms of how the person is treated. So, it isn't true that the good life is a life in which everything is good. And yet, it's a good life. And how many of you find that a bit of a paradox? It's a good life, and yet not everything is good. And how many of you recognize your own life in that sentence? Yeah, because there's no way everything could be good. You've met your relatives, you know this. It's just impossible. And, if everything was good, Ireland still would be not have defeated the All Blacks. Talk about a fly in the ointment. So really, the idea that the good life is some kind of rosy existence is not true. And in fact, the good life should be expected to have lots of ups and downs. And how many of you know people with disabilities that have lots of ups and downs? Yeah, so, that's the good life. It doesn't mean everybody's life is somehow kind of working perfectly. And so, in fact, not only do people have ups and downs, they have tragedies, they have sorrows, they have loss, they have pain, and yet even then, it is a good life. It is interesting how many people who, in the face of horrible events in their life, still find meaning in life, value, and so on. It's a very significant, kind of instructive lesson for us. And these elements of the human condition, then, are ever present, but are not a reason not to have the good life or to pursue it. These will come with it because they're built into human nature and human existence. Now, social role valorization theory uses a concept called the culturally valued analog. And for those of you that have better things to do with your life, I'll explain what this means. This refers to the fact that if in a society, if something benefits people, the vast majority of the people, then that is what you should use as the standard for people with disabilities or other devalued groups. In other words, the very starting point ought to be the same life opportunities and advantages that work for other people because they work for other people. So in this sense, we don't need to reinvent the wheel in terms of many of the good things in life. They've already been invented. We simply have to make sure people have access to them. Now, this is a quote from Muhammad. He didn't get over the wall, unfortunately. Do not say that if people do good to us, we will do good to them. And if the people oppress us, we will oppress them. But determine that if people do you good, you will do good to them. And if they oppress you, you will not oppress them. Now, this is a very important kind of statement. That if they oppress you, you will not oppress them. Now, there's a very interesting social ethic. Of course, with great spiritual roots. And it's very good to think about what the implications of that might be. For instance, if people in our culture, place great value on something like a home of their own, then why can't people with disabilities have a home of their own? Everybody else seems to want and have one. Why would they need to be cheated out of a home of their own? And yet what they get is a place to live that's not their home, that's controlled by an agency in which, they don't really and can't really say it's a home of their own. It's quite a different kind of reality. So one of the tests, or empirical tests really, is the culturally valued analog. If we're serious, we've got to stop having this big gap between what most people think would be good things they have in their life and then what people with disabilities get. And as I said, we have an uphill battle, I think, in coming years to persuade people about this. All of the things that people say people with disabilities can't do, they've now done. I'll give you an example. I've been told many times, well, people with disabilities can't work. Well, they can't work until you give them a job. That's why they can't work. And so we have people that can work that have never had an opportunity to show what they've got. But in jurisdictions where they have done that, you've seen growth in employment. There's a quote again from Jean Vanier: "One of the marvelous things about communities is that it enables us to welcome and help people in a way we couldn't as individuals. When we pool our strength and share the work and responsibility, we can welcome many people, even those in deep distress, and perhaps help them find self-confidence and inner healing." So there's great wisdom in the idea that no matter what it is that people need, our communities probably have the resources to do that. And in this sense, this is why we've looked to community as a resource, but are we effective in looking to community in using that resource? Or do we have, a way to go further? So what can you do about it? Well, I think we should challenge any kind of thinking that hurts people. And in this sense, we want to challenge the thinking, not the people that have the thinking. In that sense, it's a certain kind of thoughts are unhelpful. Oh, people can't work, they can't have a home of their own. The thinking should be challenged, but the people may simply be sincere people who have come to that conclusion from whatever kind of conditioning that they've had. So in this sense, it's the thinking again that is the crucial things. And of course, how many of you think you can actually change people's minds? Or you're depressed? Yeah, we should have everybody's hand should be up. Has your mind never been changed? Oh my God, I'm in the wrong group.
Yeah, I didn't think I'd be able to go to university, but
Been there, done that, right?
I was working on it.
Well, good luck.
Working on it, completed 1 year out of 6.
Well, look, more power to you. 1 year, then another. So good luck, good fortune to you. So the challenge is going to be what is actually factual. A lot of what people are acting on is what might be thought of as attitude, not fact, not science, not evidence. It's just simply attitude. I can remember when people said, oh, well, women can't do this or that. Right? Remember those days? It was late last week. And it's interesting, women now dominate all professions with the exception of engineering. Isn't that interesting? That's only really, sort of really over a couple of generations we've gone from very low expectations to amazing kind of results. And so again, this idea that we can't really change, it isn't really true. It is also true that we may not know how to get people good lives, but it's not a reason to give up on good lives. It's a reason to get better at figuring out how to help them come into existence. In other words, people refuse to accept the conclusion that people could have good lives because they can't envision how you do it, how you get to it. But the conclusion may be valid even if one's hesitant about, what are the means to achieve it. Again, going back to Jean Vanier, community is a sign that love is possible in a materialistic world where people so often either ignore or fight each other. It is a sign that we don't need a lot of money to be happy. In fact, the opposite. That in this sense, changing things for the better isn't really fundamentally an issue of money. It's really an issue of other things that are being asked of us. Because we're pretty affluent peoples compared with many on the planet at the moment. And look what kinds of challenges we've got. And how many of you think there are poor people that do a better job of some of this than a lot of affluent people? So the premise again, the theory that, you know, if we had more money, we'd be more virtuous, I don't think is going to pan out. So the root of virtue is not going to be in money, it's in attitudes, beliefs, relationships, kind of connections, and so on. So, and we have actually achieved many things that aren't really properly appreciated for their significance. That in these last, I'm always struck by people telling me, I travel a lot, so people always tell me, oh, you can't do this or that. And then I have to kind of tell them, well, actually, what you're saying can't be done has been done in such and such a place for 3 decades, you know, but it hadn't come across their radar. So we're actually at a fortuitous moment in history. We have all kinds of evidence of what's possible for people, persuasive evidence, but we're acting like it doesn't exist because our attitudes have convinced us it can't exist, rather than that the evidence has convinced us it can't exist. You know, we take our attitude to be the final word on things. Like in the US, everybody knew Trump wouldn't get elected. Mainstream press, they were betting on it, you know, and it turns out he didn't get elected. You know, she got more votes. It's kind of confusing, isn't it? Anyways. But to give you an example, there are jurisdictions where 7 out of 10 people with disabilities are working at regular jobs in the community for at least 10 hours a week. How many of you think that's true? Yeah, and that number is going up. And yet we have lots of places where 3 out of 10 people are working, and their number of hours isn't very much. So how many of you would be challenged by the idea that 7 out of 10 are working? Well, I think it's a challenge because it took them 30 years to get there. So it was a challenge, but they got there, which is what is so compelling. And you know, if we put the 30 years in, we can do it someplace else. You know, it can be done. The high water mark has been established. And there'll be lots of jurisdictions. We've heard presentations today just on how many people have gotten individual lives that didn't used to have them, that have homes of their own. All of that has been achieved. We don't need any more evidence of it. You know, we have plenty of evidence, but we're not taking the evidence seriously, you know, in terms of what we do about it. You know, this, we've been talking about self-direction. Self-direction was seen as utopian even a decade ago for many people. Now it's kind of routine background radiation in that sense. It's no longer revolutionary or whatever, but it was seen as, oh, very unlikely to work and this, that, and the other. And here we are with, you know, tens of thousands of people, you know, self-directing their own arrangements and so on. It says no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. Even if you are a minority of one, the truth is the truth. So in this sense, if I could go back to the truth is the truth is the truth when you act like it's the truth. And we have all this truth about what's possible for people that we're acting like it's not true. We're acting like, oh, it just seems to be the truth, when in fact, it is the truth that people got jobs, they got homes, they got new lives, all of which were intentionally created, all of which had challenges, but all of which we've been quite fruitful, and I think amazingly fruitful, in a relatively short period of time. So what do you do about this? Well, one of the things you can do is imagine better. Why is it important to imagine better? Because there is better, and if we're not looking for better, lo and behold, we'll never find better. So imagining better gets us curious about better and makes us wonder, maybe there is something better, I've just not come across it. That would be a very useful assumption. But solely imagining better isn't the same as creating better, but if you at least can imagine better, then you're on the route to achieving better. If we're going to get people good lives, then we first must imagine that life before we can create it. Because imagining creates the picture of where we're going. No picture, no destination. We need to constantly be pushing ourselves to go beyond what we've seen to what might be very good for us down the road. And it doesn't come from good intentions. It comes from forcing ourselves constantly beyond what we were taking for granted as the high watermark. So better is not a utopian concept, because it really, what better means is it's slight improvement on what you had. And we've been living lives where we make a slight improvement on what we had, day in, day out. So getting to better isn't getting to nirvana, it's getting to comparatively better than what preceded it. And better can be taken up as a one person at a time question. And it's very possible that, that at any point in your life you can do something better with your life. How many of you would agree with that premise? Now, a lot of you aren't interested in doing better. That's good. That's why you just kick back for a decade and see what happens. But if you did want to do better, it's amazing how much capacity people have that they hardly ever tap into. And, of course, the discontents in our life are actually a good source of better. If you can pay attention to what makes you unhappy, how many of you think it might just lead to something better? Because you can take instruction from your unhappiness, you know. And so unhappiness is maybe in some ways is a gift to human existence, because if we're too happy, we get nothing done. Unhappiness kind of gets us doing some useful things, at least on a good day. Now here's Helen Keller, an amazing person. Optimism is the faith that leads to achievement. Nothing can be done without hope and confidence. Now, Helen Keller wasn't a person that spoke without thinking about what she said. Helen Keller is an amazing woman, you know, and her legacy is quite profound. And so what to do now? Well, if you want people to get a good life, don't ask them what is a good life. Abstract questions about what would you like to do with your life. You know, if people haven't tasted anything in life, they don't know what to tell you. You know, they'll probably give you the answer they think you want, because it's too abstract. So what is life tasting? Give people a taste of life and then ask them, how did it taste? Why? Because it's concrete. People can relate to the actual experience. It's better to immerse people in life and ask them, how was it, than it is to talk about it. I mean, who asked you, oh, would you like sex? You know? How many of you sort of are in the experiential mode when it comes to something like that? Yeah, you got something to work with then. You know, abstract concepts, just don't do it. Don't use this at your church. So, life tasting then is a very important part of discovering what is possible in people's life. People don't know what's possible in their life as an a priori assumption. People wonder about their lives. And how many of you are living lives you would never have conceived of originally? Yeah. So in this sense, we just have to go out and discover life. And the more, of course, that you get to taste, the more parts of life that suit you, you find. And you also discover what doesn't suit you. And not only you discover what doesn't suit you, everybody knows you discovers what doesn't suit you. But in this sense, you can build a life, one element at a time, of things that are enriching and satisfying. So the practice of being person-centered isn't really some kind of planning thing. The practice is finding things to add to a person's life that enrich their life. And the more things you add, the greater the enrichment. And how many of you think that the greater the things that enrich you in your life, the more they kind of trigger other great things in one's life? So in this sense, the process of life building and life tasting is really the work of getting a good life. You taste things, you build them into your life. If you taste it, they tasted good, they didn't really do anything for you, you move on and try something else. And of course, all of this is realistic, because how many of you have done life tasting? No need to invent some new science. And how many of you have built a life It was a misguided one, I agree, but. So people with disabilities are often looked after rather than enabled to get a life. Most people wouldn't recognize this always the case, but we tend to have people with disabilities having quite custodial existences. In other words, they're looked after, but they don't have much to do in their life. It's interesting how many people I've just met that really don't have much going on in their life, and yet they're surrounded by busy staff. And lots of things are happening, but not much is being accomplished. And I think that's because we're looking after people, we're not looking after their lives. And when you shift the focus to get a life, then you're going to get a very different outcome than just minding people or looking after them or keeping them safe. And those aren't invalid things to do, but they ought not to be the priority. So formal individual planning, as Simon and others have said, it doesn't usually translate into life building, it just translates into plans that don't get implemented. And if you have your annual planning moment each year where you talk about the life you're not going to get, it kind of gets to be kind of old pretty quick. So it isn't really the planning of life, it's the doing of it that makes a difference in life building. So we need to do life, not plan it, talk about it, and so on. Why? Well, because you just got to bring things into existence that weren't there yesterday. And of course, to do that, you need to be exceedingly proactive. Proactive means grabbing the bull by the horns and making something happen, not passively kind of, and not problem solving and so on. Throughout history, it's been the inaction of those who could have acted, the indifference of those who should have known better, the silence of the voice of justice when it mattered most, that has made it possible for evil to triumph. And what we don't do is the evil that triumphs. So in this sense, we've got to be looking at what we're not doing as kind of instructive in terms of what we could be doing. And interestingly, you got to stay positive about people and their potentials. Why? Well, because negativity has a very poor track record when it comes to helping people get a good life, whereas positivity has a very good track record. But people with disabilities are largely more likely to be underestimated than overestimated. It's very rare to see people overestimated. So we should act like everybody we know is probably being sold out on some level of being not granted enough credit for their true capacities and their true potentials. And by staying positive and proactive, you look for those strengths, those gifts, those talents, those qualities that people have, and those are the raw stuff of getting a life. When you're looking for those things as positive potentials, sources of life-giving enrichment, then you can build on those because you're looking for them, you know they're there, you can effectively help life get better. Rome was not built in a day, but it was built. People forget that part of the sentence because it wasn't in the original quote, I put it in. Rome was built. It took a while, and it took a while to tear it apart too. But we covered that in part B. So you can't really build a life in a week or a month. You build a life over time. It takes some time to get all the pieces in place. And that's why the people that kind of stay the course get something done. People that dabble have a terrible track record. But when you kind of steady as you go, you get somewhere. Because one piece is building upon another. This is what people mean by a positive, proactive lifestyle development. But you've got to be positive and stay positive to do that. You really have to have what I call positive presumption. You just constantly presume we'll find a way to get there. People have a lot going for them. And staying positive is much easier to manage things because how many of you think things take a long time to get settled? It's amazing how long some problems take to get solved. But if you give yourself time, then you can get more done. I think when people think everything should come in a hurry and quick and so on, they kind of exhaust themselves. Whereas if you kind of can say, well, I'll do today what I can do today and tomorrow it's tomorrow, then you can pace yourself and there'll be lots of reserve there. Though no one can go back and make a brand new start, my friend, anyone can start from now and make a brand new end. That's by Karl Barth, by the way. And that's it. I'm done.